The moon hung low in the night sky, its pale light casting eerie shadows across the farmhouse. Wind whispered through the trees, rustling leaves like distant voices. To anyone else, the night would seem peaceful, but to old Farmer Jenkins, the tension in the air felt heavy. He had been keeping a watchful eye on the news, and he couldn't shake the fear that a group of burglars might target his land, like they had so many others in the area. It was a dark Thursday night when the stillness shattered like glass. A creaking sound, barely audible at first, pricked his ears. Farmer Jenkins sat in his living room, a cup of lukewarm coffee cradled in his hands near the flickering candlelight. He squinted through the shadows, eyes honed to see what lay beyond the porch. The moon illuminated every corner of the property, the familiar patches of his life transformed into something foreign. The barn loomed large, its weather-worn boards telling a story of years gone by, but tonight it felt different, vulnerable. The sound came again, more pronounced this time, a footstep, slow and deliberate. Farmer Jenkins's heart raced. He stood up, setting his coffee aside, and reached for the old hunting rifle that hung on the wall like a relic of another time. This weapon was not just for show. It carried with it the weight of generations' protection and survival forged into its very essence. The steep creak of the floorboard under his weight reminded him of the dangers of idle time. Time spent waiting was time the intruders could use against him. He peered through the window, fingers tightening around the rifle like a vice. His instincts, sharpened by years of hard labor and long nights, told him something was terribly wrong. The silhouette of a figure slipped behind the barn, blending with the shadows. Was it one, or more? In a tense moment, the farmhouse became the stage for a confrontation he had not anticipated. Seconds turned to minutes as he weighed his options. He could call the police, but who knew how long that would take? Minutes felt like hours when the threat was right out there, lurking and watching. Instead, Farmer Jenkins decided not just to defend, but to confront. He wasn't about to let these thieves take what didn't belong to them. He carefully stepped outside, the cool air biting at his skin. The ground crunched under his boots, a sound that rang out like a gunshot in the shroud of night. He moved quietly, knowing every creak and crack in the path leading up to the barn. As he approached, the shadows shifted and he caught glimpses of figures furtively moving about. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice booming into the void, fueled by a mix of fear and adrenaline. The figures froze, startled like deer caught in headlights. His boldness caught them off guard. It was a moment suspended in time, each side weighing the threat of the other. Two men emerged from the darker recesses of the barn, darting glances at one another. Their faces, scarred and shadowed, told stories of desperation and defiance. They were young, probably in their late 20s, dressed in dark clothing that allowed them to blend into the night like predators stalking prey. Except tonight, the roles were reversed. With a quick, calculated glance, the first burglar brandished a crowbar, raising it in a makeshift threat. "We're just looking for a quick score, old man. No one needs to get hurt," he said, his voice a jagged whisper breaking through the tension. Farmer Jenkins thrust the rifle forward, its barrel cutting through the air. The sight of it sent a jolt through the burglars. The rifle was old, but it held power. It was a warning sealed in silence. As the standoff escalated, he took a deep breath, drawing on a reservoir of courage he didn't know he had. "I've worked too hard for too long for some punks to come in and take it away from me." In that instant, time seemed to skew. The moon's light flickered like a flame, illuminating the raw fear in the burglars' eyes. They hesitated, uncertainty gripping them tighter than any weapon. It struck Farmer Jenkins that these weren't just thieves. They were desperate men, perhaps driven to crime by circumstances he knew all too well. But he couldn't let pity drown his resolve. The safety of his land, his family's legacy, rested on a knife's edge. "You need to leave," he said, his voice unwavering, an unyielding rock against a tide of chaos. One of the men, a wiry figure with quick eyes and trembling hands, glanced back at his partner. "We could just take what we need," he hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't be foolish," the other hissed, eyes darting around desperately. "The old man's got a gun. Let's just get out of here." As tension crackled in the air, Farmer Jenkins seized the moment. "Every second you stay here, you lose your chance to walk away. Just then, a loud bang echoed through the night. The barn door swung open forcefully. It was his loyal dog, Rufus, charging out. He had been locked outside while Farmer Jenkins had settled in for the evening, but now, sensing the distress, Rufus charged full throttle towards the intruders, barking furiously. For the burglars, it was a surreal nightmare unfolding. One moment they were debating their fate, and the next, a fierce dog with bared teeth bore down on them, barking as if he were the guardian of the land. One of them shouted, panic taking hold as they turned to flee. Farmer Jenkins acted without hesitation. He roared, pointing the rifle into the air for a warning shot, a shot fired not to hit, but to protect what was his. The report rang out like thunderclaps in the night, escalating chaos into sheer panic. The thieves stumbled back, tripping over their own feet, panic driving them away from the old man and his dog. Farmer Jenkins's heart raced as he watched them. Fear, adrenaline, and anger mixed into a swirling storm of emotions. They darted through the trees, disappearing into the darkness as fast as they had arrived. For a long moment, silence settled over the farm like a fragile truce. Then, just as quickly, Farmer Jenkins dropped the rifle, the weight of the night crashing down like the final wave of a storm. He sank to the ground, breathless and shaking. Rufus bounded back to him, his loyal companion, panting and full of life, a guardian angel in a chaotic world. "You did good, boy," Farmer Jenkins murmured, running a hand over Rufus's shaggy head, grounding himself in the present. The farm was safe for now, his land untouched, but they both knew the night's ordeal would leave a mark. Inside, he poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, hands still trembling. The warmth of the mug offered some comfort as he glanced outside, the moon still high in the sky. Pain lingered in his bones, but the thrill of the encounter buzzed in his mind. What had just happened? It was a wake-up call. Days passed, but Farmer Jenkins couldn't shake the shadow of that night. The world felt different, threatening and wide open, filled with possibilities both good and bad. Even as he worked the fields and took care of his animals, an edge of vigilance took root in him. He spoke to friends and neighbors, sharing his encounter and gathering tales, stitching together a community of protectors. That night, he learned more than just how to defend his home. He discovered resilience and strength deep within. In the stillness that followed the chaos, he felt something shift, a spark of camaraderie with neighbors who stood watch, ready to lend a hand, ready to stand up for what was right. But the creeping fear of vulnerability remained, a gentle reminder that darkness lay just beyond the safety of familiar walls. Every creak in the night became a whisper of caution, every gust of wind a reminder to stay alert. Among the clamor of life, Farmer Jenkins found a new purpose. He now hosted community meetings, urging others to share their stories and safeguard their rights, a movement inspired by a simple truth: that strength comes in numbers. One dark night, as he recounts his story to familiar faces illuminated by candlelight, the resilience flows through the room, a community strengthened in its resolve, no longer just farmers and families but guardians of each other's lives. Together, they forged bonds of trust and unity, ready to fight back against the darkness. And even as quiet laughter filled the air, Farmer Jenkins remained vigilant, understanding now that while the threat of burglars may come and go, the true value of life lay in the bonds forged in moments of desperation. In every window of that farmhouse, a light burned bright, a beacon of hope, of defiance, a reminder that just as the moon rises, so too would he stand watchful, courageous, ready to protect the land he loved. A loud crash echoed through the stillness of the night, shattering the calm like a glass window thrown from a rooftop. Farmer James Thatcher bolted upright in his creaky old bed, heart pounding in rhythm with the adrenaline coursing through him. He had lived in this old farmhouse for over 2 decades, and the peace of the farm was something sacred to him, a quiet sanctuary after years of hard labor. But that night was different. He swung his legs out from under the thick quilt, feet hitting the cold wooden floor with a thud. What could it be? A raccoon, a loose shutter, or something more sinister? He grabbed the flashlight that sat on his bedside table, its beam cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. With each creak of the floor as he moved, he could feel the weight of dread settle on his shoulders, but a farmer knows this land intimately. He wasn't going to let anything or anyone threaten it. Outside, the moon hung low, casting a silver glow over the fields, and the world seemed frozen in time. Quiet, except for the rustling leaves and the soft chirp of crickets, only added to his anxiety. But then another sound reached his ears, a voice low and urgent drifting through the air. The unmistakable tones of a confrontation echoed from the barn. James's heart sank. Burglars, they must have come to take what he had labored for. A flicker of anger surged within him, mingling dangerously with fear. He moved toward the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass, straining to see what was happening just a few yards away. Two figures crept around the barn, their silhouettes dark against the moonlight. One of them held a crowbar, the other fumbled with a lock. James gritted his teeth. They wouldn't just threaten his livelihood, they were encroaching on his life. With the force of a decision made long ago, he moved toward the old hunting rifle that hung on the wall, its wooden stock warm from the sun but now solid and heavy in his hands. As he stepped outside, the cool night air bit at his skin. He crept toward the barn, picking his path cautiously through the gravel driveway, the crunch beneath his boots as loud as thunder in the stillness. Each step brought him closer to confrontation, his heartbeat quickening with every breath he took. Suddenly, a shout broke through the night. One of the burglars whispered urgently. James paused, heart racing. Maybe they were reconsidering, maybe they'd turn and flee. But then he saw the second figure step forward, his face illuminated by the moonlight, revealing wild, desperate eyes. "No, we need this." James swallowed hard. There was a mix of desperation and determination in the air, the kind that can lead someone down a dark path. He knew that type of fear all too well. The bills piling up, the haunting decline of the farm market. He had faced those shadows himself but had never resorted to crime. And yet here were two men who had. In that moment, a boldness surged within him. "Hey!" he shouted, voice shaking the air. The words shot out like bullets and both thieves froze, caught like deer in headlights. The initial shock of his voice hung between them, and James felt an odd mix of satisfaction and terror. They had expected an easy grab farmer in bed, quiet night, and here he was, standing with resolve. "Old man, nothing's going to happen to you." The first burglar shouted back, gripping the crowbar like a lifeline. There was panic in his voice, tinged with bravado, and James knew this was no empty threat. He could feel the tension rippling through the cold air, wrapping tight like a noose around them all. James interjected, raising the rifle as a warning, its weight feeling right in his hands. The two men exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering between them like a candle about to go out. The second burglar spat, trying to regain some control over the situation. "Get out of here now," James growled, wrapping his finger tightly around the trigger. It was a simple, powerful move, but he didn't want to use it. He had never thought he would ever point a gun at another human being. But now, primal instincts kicked in. It wasn't just about the farm, it was about his right to defend everything he had worked for. With a look of resigned defeat, the first burglar turned, eyes wide as he spoke hurriedly to his partner. "Let's just go." But the panic in their eyes didn't escape James's notice. The calculation that came from desperation hazed over their minds. They were wild animals trapped in a corner. As the men started to back away, James stepped forward, grounding himself in the dirt, holding the rifle steady. They turned to run, dashing away toward the tree line like shadows retreating from the light. Relief mixed with disbelief flooded James as he lowered the rifle, breathing heavily, trying to process what just happened. His heart thudded fiercely against his chest. Was it over? But not for long. The sound of his own breath was abruptly overshadowed by footfalls echoing behind him. In a panic, he spun around. It was Rufus, his loyal golden retriever, bounding towards him with a clamoring bark. "Just a minute, boy. It's okay," James said, feeling the grounding warmth of his pet pushing against the swell of chaos in his mind. The adrenaline still coursed through James as he took a moment to breathe. The night's tranquility returned but lingered with an edge of uncertainty. That night, something shifted in him. The relief quickly transformed into a torrent of thoughts. Who were those men? What drove them to this? The faceless figures who'd snuck through the shadows were more than just thieves. They were embodiments of desperation, and James often felt the weight of that burden too. As he sat down at the kitchen table, the familiar creaking of the old wood beneath him was soothing. He cupped his hands around a warm mug of coffee, staring blankly into the swirling brown depths. The night's events echoed louder than any rooster crow. He couldn't just lock the doors and pretend it wouldn't happen again. He had to protect his home, yes, but it was also about understanding. In the days following the incident, Farmer James realized something vital. The farm needed more than just tangible security. It needed connection, community. It was an isolated patch of land, but it didn't have to be. The quiet fields could flourish with voices raised in camaraderie. He reached out to neighbors, sparking conversations over cups of coffee in backyard gardens, sharing stories both light and heavy. They talked about the ups and downs of farming, how they aggregated risks, and how they faced adversity together like a woven fabric binding them against storms, both literal and metaphorical. One balmy afternoon, they held an impromptu gathering on his front porch. Laughter mingled with the gentle rustling of trees, relaxed shoulders letting go of burdens. They shared not just farming tips but real fears, vulnerabilities, and stories of encounters both funny and frightening. Laughter rang like chimes in the wind, breathing life into the once lonely land. One neighbor, Dan, a stout farmer with a heart as big as his wheat fields, told a tale of how just weeks ago someone had tried to break into his tractor shed. He laughed, his grin wide. Others chimed in with their own experiences, a camaraderie forming over the vulnerability of threat. Each shared story built the web of the community tighter. Farmer James no longer felt alone. His experience had ignited a sense of awareness among neighbors. They began to watch each other's lands closer. The bond stretched across the stretch of fields, neighbors now transformed into allies. But that night lingered at the edge of his thoughts. It reminded him how quickly life can change, a fleeting moment where safety turned to chaos and back again. While the weight of that reality was heavy, he learned to balance it with the warmth of community. As the months passed and seasons turned, James saw the crops flourish. With hard work and unity, the farm became a symbol of resilience. Although the specter of those burglars still haunted his thoughts, he no longer felt that it was a personal battle. This was about safety, about shared trust, and that made all the difference. One night, as he sat under the stars with Rufus at his side, the tranquility washed over him. The scare of that fateful night had drifted into the background, transformed into something beautiful. James closed his eyes, letting the breeze whisper through the fields, feeling grateful not just for his land, but for the support of a community that stood with him shoulder to shoulder. That night, he chose to believe in the goodness of people, knowing that together they could shine a light bright enough to ward off the darkness lurking outside their doors. A soft smile crept across his face, heart swelling with the simple joy of belonging. And as the stars twinkled above the farmhouse, he held on tightly to the thing that mattered most: community, trust, and the promise of tomorrow. Life may throw challenges their way, but it was the unity and resilience that would emerge victorious in the end. The farmhouse stood silent beneath an indigo sky, worn wood and aged bricks whispering stories of years gone by. It was late, the kind of tranquil night where the only sounds were the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. But inside, Farmer Ben Carter squinted at the flickering light of his old oil lamp, his mind racing with muffled worries. Just a week earlier, whispers of theft had spiraled through the small farming community. Crops and livestock were disappearing overnight. Farmers huddled in the local diner, sharing cautionary tales over cups of black coffee. Tonight, the worry pounded in Ben's chest, the kind of fear that had him tossing and turning in bed. He'd taken to locking his doors and double-checking the windows, but what good would that do if someone really wanted in? Just as he was about to set the lamp down, a sudden sound made him freeze, a loud thud outside, followed by low voices murmuring like shadows creeping in the dark. Ben's heart leaped into his throat, pounding like a jackhammer against his ribs. Without thinking, he grabbed the old shotgun resting against the wall, feeling its cold weight in his hands nothing more than a relic, yet it offered the kind of reassurance he needed in that moment. He slipped to the window, wary not to creak the floorboards beneath him. Outside, two figures moved stealthily across the yard, their silhouettes blurred under the faint moonlight. Ben's stomach knotted. There was no mistaking it anymore. Intruders. He could see them fumbling with something. Was it the barn? He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was more than just his crops. This was his home, years of hard work about to be threatened by two desperate strangers. He opened the front door slowly, the hinges protesting with a low groan. Keeping to the shadows, he made his way around the side of the house, blending into the darkness, a lone predator stalking within his own territory. From his concealed vantage point behind an old oak tree, he observed the scene unfold. The two men were clearly young, maybe in their 20s, dressed in dark, ragged clothes. They seemed nervous, glancing around as if the night itself was alive, watching their every move. One of them brandished a crowbar while the other fumbled with a lock on the barn door. The second thief whispered, his voice barely escaping his throat, laced with uncertainty. The first snapped, impatience clear. Ben peered closely, noting the way their hands shook, flickers of desperation mingling with adrenaline. Theft was born from fear and desperation, he thought as he tightened his grip on the shotgun. He felt a pang of understanding mixed with resolve. They were here to take what he had, to strip away his years of labor. He could almost taste the fear in the air, thick and stifling. This wasn't just a crime, it was a declaration of war on everything he had built. "Decide, Ben," he murmured to himself, heart racing. With that thought shielded in determination, he stepped out from the shadows. The sudden crack of a twig echoed through the night, a sound that ricocheted in the tense silence. Both men froze, heads snapping to the direction of the noise, eyes wide. The first burglar called out, voice shaky. Ben stepped further into the light of the moon, the shotgun raised but not aimed directly. "This is my land." The two men exchanged frantic glances, their bravado slipping away like sand through fingers. In that moment, Ben felt the thrill of power surging through his veins. It was as if time slowed, a heartbeat stretched thin, the weight of the air pressing against them all. "What are you gonna do?" the second burglar shouted, trying to muster courage amidst fear. "I'd rather not," Ben replied evenly, voice steady. "But I will if it means protecting my home. Get out." The first burglar gripped his crowbar tighter, his expression wavering between anger and panic. He took a shaky half-step forward. "You don't want to mess with us, old man." But even he wasn't fully convinced. Ben could see it in his eyes, the uncertainty, the doubt that was eating at him from the inside. Ben's voice was low and strong, a primal growl that left no room for disobedience. The tension hung thick in the air, electric. Ben felt every muscle in his body coiling, ready to spring. He glanced at the barn door, now wide open, a door to years of sweat and toil, waiting to be violated. Suddenly, the second burglar took a step back, his hands flying up in a sign of surrender. Forget it. But the first, desperate for a victory, still hesitated. "No, we need the money." "Yeah," the second one argued, trembling. At that moment, Ben raised the shotgun slightly. "You need to make up your mind fast." A high-pitched shout broke free from the first burglar's throat, both men suddenly turning to flee, crashing through the brush and disappearing into the void of darkness. Ben's heart raced, adrenaline filling him, the rush of victory filling his chest. He stood, breathless, realizing he had stood his ground, had defended not just his property but his very life. But the thrill quickly faded, leaving behind a stark, lingering fear. It was a close call, and he knew they could very well return or worse, result in retaliation from someone even more desperate. His thoughts spiraled into darker corners. After a long, sleepless night, dawn broke over the horizon. As the sun's first rays painted the sky with colors of gold and orange, Ben stood by his window, staring out at the fields he loved. Every inch of land represented sweat and tears tilled into the earth. It was his bond with nature, with life itself. And those men, they had tried to take that from him. A new resolve settled deep within him. This was not just about him. It was about all the neighbors who worked just as hard, who had felt the shadow of fear creeping into their lives. He decided in that instant to take action, not just for himself, but for everyone living under the weight of vulnerability. Over the next few weeks, Farmer Ben gathered his neighbors. The local farmers who had traded their crops shared drinks at the diner and exchanged hearty laughter over shared sorrows. He told them the story of the night he faced thieves in their own backyard. Eyes widened in disbelief, fear mixed with a shared urgency. They met under the fading light of a setting sun, forming a circle on the old wooden porch of his farmhouse. "If we are to stand a chance against these threats, we have to stand together," Ben urged, his voice steady. "We need to protect not just our property but each other. Let's rally." The need for community sank into those gathered. A bond formed, one resilient against fear and laced with a renewed sense of purpose. They began organizing patrols, keeping watch over each other's farms, sharing resources, even creating a group chat to stay connected. Each member felt empowered, fortified by the notion of camaraderie. As the nights turned darker once again, they took turns walking fields, flashlights cutting through silhouettes of corn and wheat. Ben felt alive during those watches, his heart swelling with admiration for friends rallying together out of shared experience. Each whisper of wind, rustle of leaves now a symbol of hope, community, and unity. As time passed, Ben couldn't shake the impact of that night. It was not just the physical threat of burglars that had been fought off. It was the fight against the cycle of fear that had reached into their lives. Farmers began sharing more than just crops. They shared stories, joys, and small moments of vulnerability, weaving their lives together. Then one evening, while Ben was out patrolling, he spotted a figure a distance away, lurking near the barn. Without a moment's hesitation, his instincts kicked in. He knew this barn like the back of his hand. With a steady grip on his flashlight, he approached, his heart beating like it had that night so long ago. As he drew closer, the figure became clearer, a scruffy young man looking restless, scanning the area. Ben's throat tightened as he realized it was one of the burglars from before. The moment hung thick with tension. Here was a second chance, a chance to confront the shadow that had threatened their lives. Ben shouted, the fear and resolve merging into a single, powerful message. The young man jumped and their eyes locked. In that instant, Ben saw the flicker of regret, the weariness painted across the burglar's face. The bravado from before had faded, desperation dripped from every movement. "Please," the young man pleaded, voice cracking. We didn't want to hurt anyone." Ben found himself asking, the words filled with an unexpected softness. He understood desperation, the way it curled around a person like a vine squeezing the life from a tree. I don't know what else to do," he stumbled over his words, eyes pleading. "Things are tough. I thought maybe It doesn't have to be this way," Ben interrupted, lowering his flashlight slightly but holding his ground. The young man trembled, fear and desperation mingling in his expression. "I don't want to go back to that life," he whispered, breaking, the weight of decisions heavy in the air around them. Ben looked into those eyes, a mirror reflecting back the struggles of many, the rawness of human vulnerability. The urge to call the police, to punish, flickered momentarily but then disappeared. He thought of the farm community, of the strength they had built together. "Here's the deal. Leave tonight, but don't let this be your end. Talk to me, to any of us." The burglar stared, wide-eyed, disbelief washing over his features. Ben continued, firm but compassionate. "You've already taken the first step, you're here. Don't walk back into darkness." With those words, he stepped back, creating space, a lifeline reaching out. The young man's eyes glistened with uncertainty but also a flicker of hope. "I'll try. I won't come back," he promised quietly, stepping back slowly into the night, vanishing like an echo but leaving behind a lingering sense of possibility. As Ben watched him slip away, the weight lifted, leaving behind exhilaration mingled with relief. He had chosen community over conflict, understanding over anger. Returning to his own land, he felt different. The bond woven with his neighbors was unbreakable, a fabric of shared experiences that strengthened with every passing day. He was no longer just a farmer standing alone. He was part of something greater, a mission to protect not only himself but to uplift others. Each sunset and sunrise became a reminder of that night. The chaos turned to clarity, the resilience of community shining brighter than any darkness that dared to encroach. And as the seasons changed and crops flourished, Ben understood more profoundly. It wasn't just the fields that grew, but the bonds that ended up shaping the very soul of their lives. In the heart of that farmhouse, laughter and warmth replaced the stark fear of solitude. Together, they stood ready, watchful, stronger than ever, knowing that no matter what came their way, they would face it together. And that made all the difference. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow that flickered through the sprawling fields surrounding the old farmhouse. Most nights were quiet, desolate even, but tonight felt different. It felt electric, as if the very air held its breath. Inside, Farmer Tom Jenkins sat in his worn-out armchair, the soft creak of its wood mingling with the crackling fire. A cup of lukewarm coffee sat forgotten on the table beside him, steam dissipating into the chill of the evening. In his 50 years on this land, Tom had learned to trust his instincts. And right now, that gut feeling was insisting that something was amiss. He glanced toward the window, shadows dancing outside as wind stirred the tall grass. It was too quiet. The occasional chirp of crickets seemed muted, swallowed by an unshakable tension that wrapped around him like a heavy blanket. Then a noise shattered the silence, a faint rustling, delicate as whispers. Ben's heart thrummed in his chest. What could it be? A stray animal, or worse, could it be intruders? He rose from his chair and moved cautiously toward the kitchen where an old shotgun leaned against the wall. It was worn but sturdy, a relic of better times, yet it still held a certain power. It had been years since he had last felt the need to reach for it. Tonight, instinct sharpened his senses. The gun felt right in his hands again. With the shotgun clutched firmly, he peered through the grime-streaked window. Beyond the dim shine of the porch light, he saw two dark figures creeping around the barn. They moved like shadows, glancing nervously over their shoulders as they approached the door. Tom's heart raced, adrenaline surged through his veins like fire. Burglars. They were here to rob him. The thought rekindled every fear he'd ever known, threats to his livelihood, to his way of life. This wasn't just property, it was his life's work. He couldn't let them take it. He stepped back, mind racing. Should he call the police? No time for that. He knew help would take too long. This was his battle to fight, and he needed to act fast. The two men hacked hurriedly at the barn door, grunting with urgency. The sound of metal scraping against wood echoed in the night, a frantic race against time. Tom took a deep breath, steadying himself. He opened the door just enough to slip through, the cool air hitting his face like a warning. He shouted, voice deep and commanding, breaking the quiet night like a gunshot. The men froze, hearts caught in their throats. Tom's eyes locked on theirs, and he felt a moment of stillness, a pause that seemed to stretch into eternity. He could see the fear flicker across their faces, fear that mingled with surprise. They hadn't expected him to be home. One of them shouted, trying to sound tough, but the quaver in his voice betrayed him. "Then you best turn around and walk away," Tom replied firmly, the weight of the shotgun steady in his grip. The second burglar, lanky and jittery, glanced at his partner, the unease palpable. "We don't have time to waste," he protested, his voice rising with anxiety. "Those few things belong to me," Tom shot back, taking a step closer, aiming the shotgun slightly upward as a warning. The air crackled with tension. It felt as if the night itself held its breath. Tom knew they were calculating their next move, desperately trying to regain control of a situation spiraling out of their grasp. In that moment, he understood the psychology of fear, theirs and his own. They were cornered animals. He was the seasoned farmer ready to protect his land. "Let's just take off," the lanky one urged again, his eyes darting. "We'll find another target, but the first burglar shook his head, rage and panic battling within him. "No, we can't just let this go." Desperation was a powerful thing, and Tom could see how it twisted their common sense, pulling them toward a dangerous edge. Tom commanded again, this time lowering the shotgun just slightly to emphasize the seriousness of the threat. The two men exchanged frantic glances, fear washing over them. Ben could see them unraveling, and he felt the heaviness of their desperation wash over him too. He understood it, more than he wanted to admit, how tough times coaxed good men down dark paths. But he couldn't afford to feel sympathy now. It was survival. He shouted, heart in his throat, ready to pull the trigger if need be. Finally, the first burglar took a step back, his bravado collapsing under the weight of fear. "Let's get out of here," he hissed, pulling on the arm of his partner. Tom watched as they turned and ran, the night swallowing their fleeing shadows. Relief rushed over him, quickly followed by a wave of confusion. He didn't know whether to be relieved or sickened by the encounter. Had they truly intended harm, or had desperation driven them to this? In the aftermath, Tom stood there, shotgun still in his hands, anchored to the spot. The barn door, now slightly ajar, felt like a wound to his pride. He had defended his land, yes, but at what cost? The world was shifting, and not just around him. It was a harsh wake-up call that sent tremors through his every thought. He gathered himself, walked back inside, and leaned the shotgun against the wall. The flickering warmth of the fire did little to soothe the turmoil that churned in his gut. Flashes of the men's faces danced in his mind, painted by the shadows of disbelief and regret. What would they do next? Would they come back? Would his neighbors be next? These questions gnawed at him, the throbbing pulse of unease refusing to let go. Days passed, but the specter of that night hung around like a persistent fog. Tom went about his morning chores, but every creak of the farmhouse seemed amplified. Every rustle of the wind sent his thoughts spiraling into dark corners. He felt a collective anxiety draping over the farm community, a fear that spurred whispers and glances exchanged in the diner. I need to do something, he thought. As farmers and neighbors come together through thick and thin, he understood that this was not just his battle but a larger fight against desperation and fear. That evening, he gathered a group of fellow farmers at the local diner under a dimming light filled with shadows. Over plates of steaming food and mugs of coffee, Tom shared the tale of that dark night. Faces around the table shifted from skeptical to concerned, growing grave as he recounted the confrontation. We can't let fear dictate our lives. We can't let these thieves break our spirit, he said, voice steady, conviction igniting in the eyes around him. We need to stand together. We need to watch out for each other. A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered crowd. What initially felt like an isolated incident transformed into a collective threat. Together, they brainstormed strategies to protect their properties, devising a plan to create a watch system, scheduling shifts to keep an eye on each other's land, pooling resources and tools. As the weeks went by, that sense of unity amplified. Patrol nights became a source of camaraderie, a way to share fears and laughter while standing guard. It slowly transformed from a haunting burden into a bond of support that would strengthen their community. One evening, while on patrol with his neighbor Earl, he spotted a car idling a little too close to one of the barns. Earl whispered, his eyes narrowed. "That doesn't look right," Tom replied, heart pounding, fingers tightening around the flashlight he held. They moved closer, shadows blending against the night until they could see the car more clearly. Its headlights were off, leaving only the vague outlines of silhouettes inside familiar shapes that sent goosebumps crawling over Tom's skin. Earl hissed, eyes wide, recognition washing over the two men. The adrenaline surged anew, igniting old instincts. Tom knew they had to act decisively. "Stay back," he whispered, the gravity of their situation sinking in. As he stealthily approached the vehicle, two young men emerged from the shadows, brandishing crowbars, the very same faces that had so brazenly trespassed weeks before. Tom shouted, not hesitating this time, "You need to leave." The burglars turned, eyes wide with fear and panic as recognition dawned on their faces. One shouted, taking a step back. Tom sensed a shift. They appeared more frightened than defiant this time. He lowered his flashlight but kept his stance strong. "You think this is smart?" he asked, voice firm but steady, the weight of care threading anger within him. "Just let us go." The other burglar whimpered, hands shaking as they fumbled with their crowbars. There it was, the desperation, raw and unfiltered. Tom didn't want to feel sympathy, but he could see in their faces the reflection of life he knew well, struggles that could twist even the best intentions. "Survival doesn't have to mean dishonesty or theft," Tom said, stepping forward into the dim light. In that moment, the reality struck. These were not just faceless threats. They were young men caught in a cycle of desperation. They were human like him. He recognized their pain had faced similar struggles. One burglar, shaking, dropped the crowbar to the ground, the metal clanging against the pavement. "I'm done," he mumbled. The other hesitated, looking at his partner, then back at Tom. "We'll go." Tom felt that flicker of understanding, that crack of hope forming in the air between them, stronger than fear. Change your path. Talk to others, get help. With that, they took their first steps back, the barriers of confrontation breaking down into something more human, a realization that understanding could lead to change. The two men turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving Tom standing under the stars, heart calmer yet profoundly shaken. Those nights of watching over their farms evolved into something deeper, a sense of togetherness transformed, stitched tightly by a community rallying around each other's struggles and fears. No longer just neighbors, they became a family, a force phenom to confront adversity together. And as the days continued to pass under the warm glow of the sun, Farmer Tom Jensen became more than just a protector of his land. He became a beacon of resilience, forging connections where darkness had once threatened. No one knew what tomorrow might bring, but together they faced it. A community born from struggle, forever bound by empathy and compassion, stronger than any thief that dared to cross their threshold. As friendships forged in the fires of crisis blossomed, the farmhouse stood proud and unyielding, a testament to the power of unity against any storm. The moon hung low in the night sky, casting an otherworldly glow over the sprawling expanse of Farmer Joe MacDonald's fields. It was a still evening, the kind when even the wind seemed to hold its breath and everything felt almost serene. But deep within Joe's gut, a tension churned, a warning echoing in the back of his mind. For weeks now, whispers of trouble had drifted through the small farming community, crops disappearing, barns ransacked, even livestock stolen under cover of darkness. With each tale, Joe felt his heart sink further. He'd invested everything into this land. Every ounce of sweat and blood from endless days had flourished here. Now, the threat of losing it sent icy fingers creeping down his spine. Tonight felt different, charged. As Joe settled into his favorite armchair, the old wood creaking beneath him, he couldn't shake off the unease. Glancing at the window, he caught a glimpse of movement outside, shadows flitting across the yard, and his heart leaped. He focused harder, muscles tensing. Then it came, a loud crash. The sound of something heavy hitting the ground echoed through the stillness. Adrenaline flooded Joe's system, and he lunged toward the front door, heart hammering in rhythm with his footsteps. He grabbed the old extra-long shotgun that had seen better days, its weight familiar yet strangely comforting in his hands. Through the door, he stepped out into the cool night air, the world unfolding before him like a stage set in chaos. Two figures darted near the barn, low and furtive, moving with the urgency of a predator. Joe's pulse quickened as he slipped behind the oak tree that stood sturdy and ancient, a sentinel watching over his land. He narrowed his eyes, 3 decades of farming experience sharpening his instincts. The men were younger, clad in dark clothing, the kind that seems to blend with shadows. As they crept closer to the barn door, he moved silently, positioning himself just outside their line of sight. One of them whispered, glancing over his shoulder. The fear and uncertainty in his voice sent a chill through Joe. "Doesn't matter," the second replied, almost fiercely. It was a terrible feeling, knowing that they intended to violate not just his home but the trust he built with the land, each inch of soil a testament to his hard work. As they fumbled with the barn door, prying it open inch by agonizing inch, Joe's resolve steeled. He shouted, voice booming through the night like thunder breaking a storm. Both men froze, suddenly caught in the spotlight of his fury. Strangely, relief flooded through Joe. They hadn't expected him, not here, not now. In that fragile moment, time stood still, each second hanging like a pendulum between fear and defiance. The first burglar turned, eyes wide, and Joe could see the panic rising, a raw wave of realization that they were no longer the hunters but had become the hunted. He cried, raising his hands in a sign of surrender. "Then you'd best leave. This is my home and you're not welcome here," Joe replied, voice firm but steady. He aimed the shotgun skyward, not wanting to shoot but willing to defend what was his. The second burglar glanced nervously at his partner, desperation etching lines into his youthful face. He blurted, his bravado cracking like dry leaves. Joe felt the swell of anger rising, but beneath it was something deeper, a hint of empathy. He realized these weren't mere shadows invading his farm. They were desperate boys, perhaps a product of circumstances he knew all too well. The world weighed heavily on all their shoulders. "Doesn't have to end this way," Joe intoned, lowering the barrel just a fraction but maintaining his position. "You're risking everything for what?" For a split second, Joe saw the flicker of doubt cross their faces, that moment when fear wrestles against reason. The first burglar replied, desperation pouring from his words. The raw truth of those words cut through the tension like a knife. Joe understood the weight of survival, the lengths people would go to in overcoming it. He hadn't built this farm overnight, and every struggle had carved him into the man he was. "We're all struggling," he replied, voice softening slightly. "But this isn't the way." The shift in the air was palpable, as if hope and regret danced in the space between them. The first burglar hesitated, eyes darting between Joe and the barn door, which stood ajar with opportunity. "Let us go. We can walk away from this," he pleaded, his bravado teetering on a thin edge. "Go," Joe commanded, voice still firm but carrying an undercurrent of compassion. "Take the chance." Time felt suspended, and he could see their worlds collide, fear, desperation, hope crashing together in improbable chaos. For a moment, he was just an old farmer making a choice, but it resonated deeper than that. With a deep breath, the first burglar stepped back, then glanced back at his partner, whose expression broke into a hesitant acceptance. "Let's go," he said, a quiet submission settling over them. Slowly, they turned, shuffling away, quickening their pace as the darkness swallowed them whole. Joe stood there, heart pounding rapidly as they vanished into the night, feeling the pulse of adrenaline begin to fade, leaving a strange mixture of relief and something that felt a lot like loss. An emptiness lingered in his chest, mingled with the weight of their lives intersecting for that brief moment. As dawn broke, rosy hues illuminated the farm, imbuing new life into the fields. Joe wandered outside, shotgun still in hand but now lowered. He scanned the land he had cherished and nurtured. The truth gnawed at him. Were they still out there? How many others would be driven to the edge just like them? That evening, he gathered the other farmers in the town, just as he had seen those figures vanish under the cover of night. As they huddled in the diner, whispers of concern filled the room, shadows dashed across familiar faces, many of whom had once leaned on each other through every hardship. He recounted the encounter, detailing the desperation he sensed in the burglar's tone, how they were not just criminals but young men trapped without options. "We're all fighting battles," he said, voice steady as he scanned the room. "But we can't let fear tear us apart." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Together, they decided to form a watch system, a way to support one another and bolster their defenses against despair. They scheduled patrols and arranged for support during harvest season, understanding the stakes were far too high to navigate alone. As weeks turned into a few months, the power of unity displayed itself in small yet significant ways. They shared laughter and stories at long tables brimming with food, bonds forged amidst the camaraderie that emerged from vulnerability. Patrol nights transformed into moments where neighbors turned into allies, companionship built on the shared understanding of hard work, toil, and empathic awareness. One brisk evening while walking the perimeter of his land, Joe spotted movement at the edge of the barn out of the corner of his eye. Heart racing, he crept closer, the sound of his boots softly crunching on the gravel underfoot. The flashlight beam illuminated the figure behind the barn, a young man, shoulders hunched, rummaging through items left out in the open. Joe called out, voice stronger this time, digging down deep into the well of his resolve. The boy whirled around, wide-eyed, panic flashing across his face. He stammered, the tremor in his voice cutting through the darkness as it echoed back. Joe softened at the sight of him, a mere boy, perhaps no older than 18, dirt smudged across his face. "I'm not here to hurt you," Joe replied, lowering his flashlight. I was just looking for food. I didn't mean to." The boy's voice cracked, vulnerability pouring out from every word. Joe felt a pang of empathy, emotions overlapping with his resolve. He knew this feeling all too well. "Let's talk," he said, more gently now. Before long, the boy opened up, pouring out his struggles, each word a sobering reflection of desperation. Life had hit him hard, The world outside seemed to veer toward hopelessness, and the path to survival led him here. Joe listened, absorbing every painful detail, recognizing the fragility of the boy's spirit. "I'm just trying to find a way," the boy whispered, his eyes turning glassy. "Sometimes we all need a little help," Joe replied softly, heart heavy yet hopeful. "Keep coming back." That evening, a pact formed, a promise to guide him, not just through survival but toward responsibility, hope, and community. As he walked the boy back to his home, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of possibility, a sign that even the darkest moments could yield light. Weeks passed, and the boy became a regular visitor on Joe's farm. With every passing day, he learned about hard work and the satisfaction that blossomed from it. The shadow of desperation began to lift, replaced by an understanding of empathy, resilience, and belonging. The nights of patrol morphed into moments of laughter, fellowship, and the unshakable bond of a community standing strong against the winds of hardship. They shared the joy of harvest, the thrill of simple victories, and together faced every challenge that came their way. Each patrolling night became a vigil of hope, intertwining voices that echoed through the fields, a chorus of resilience cutting through the shadows. They stood up against fear, driving it back until the community grew stronger and more vibrant than ever. One fateful evening, under that same low moon, Joe found himself reflecting on how far they had come from the fear of trespassers to the outstretched hands of healing. The farmhouse stood in stark contrast to that night long ago. It was now filled with warmth, laughter, and love, built on the strong foundation of resilience. "Together," Joe whispered to himself, that simple word holding the power to change lives. Empowered, they had transformed not just their darkest moments, but had forged a bond beyond the stolen nights. And in the heart of that farmhouse, Joe discovered that the greatest treasures in his life had become the very people who stood beside him, fearlessly facing tomorrow together, come what may. The battles fought were not just his own, but became everyone's, a testament to the strength woven into their shared struggles, rooted in hope born from empathy. As the night deepened and the stars sparkled above, the world transformed, no longer just a dark expanse but a canvas painted with possibilities, hope, and an unyielding sense of kinship. And that made all the difference. The creaking floorboards echoed through the stillness of the farmhouse as the clock struck midnight. Farmer Sam Thompson sat at his kitchen table, the glow of a solitary lamp casting a warm, golden light on the weathered wood. Silence enveloped the farmhouse, broken only by the distant rustling of the wind through the cornfields. It was supposed to be a peaceful night, just another ordinary evening on his family's land. But Sam felt an unsettling energy in the air, as if the world outside was holding its breath. Just days earlier, rumors had spread through the small, tight-knit community about a string of burglaries. Neighbors whispered about thieves targeting farms, creeping quietly to steal crops, livestock, and for some, their hard-earned peace of mind. Sam had locked his doors and double-checked his windows, yet a gnawing fear tugged at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that his careful preparations might not be enough. Then came a sound that shattered the silence, a loud crash. It echoed from the barn, reverberating through the earth and shaking Sam from his thoughts. Instinct kicked in, adrenaline surging. He slipped his hand around the old baseball bat resting against the counter. Crops were vulnerable, cattle were at risk, and now his sanctuary was being threatened. Quietly, Sam made his way to the door, each creak beneath his feet sounding like an alarm in the stillness. He paused, taking a moment to listen. Was that a voice? He strained to catch the words, heart pounding. His throat tightened. Two people. What were they after? Without a second thought, Sam pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool night, the moon illuminating the path ahead. Shadows moved furtively near the barn, and the adrenaline coursed through his veins. He could see two figures, young men, hunched over, desperately trying to pry open the barn door. His farm was not just property, it was his life's work, and he would protect it fiercely. "Hey!" Sam's voice boomed, cutting through the tension like a knife. The burglars froze, caught in the act. One turned, eyes wide with shock. Just a minute," he stammered, his bravado crumbling under the weight of Sam's presence. The second thief glanced at his partner, an image of panic etched on his face. he shouted, voice trembling, shifting his crowbar in a defensive stance. Sam tightened his grip on the bat, heart racing. "You're trespassing on my property," he said firmly, taking a step forward. The first burglar looked paralyzed, a conflict raging within him. "We just need a little money, man." Sam's heart sank. He understood desperation all too well. Life on the farm was a constant struggle. The weight of the world pressed down hard on everyone, but there was no justification for stealing from him. "Like I said, you have one chance to walk away," he replied, lowering the bat slightly, still ready to swing if necessary. The tension stretched thin, a tightrope between fear and defiance. The thieves exchanged nervous glances, calculating their next move as the reality of being caught set in. Suddenly, the first burglar turned on his partner. "Forget it," he yelled, panic spilling over. With that, they bolted. Sam watched as they sprinted toward the tree line, shadows swallowed by the darkness. Relief washed over him but quickly faded, replaced by a storm of emotions: pride, fear, confusion. He defended his land, yes, but the image of their frightened faces haunted him. Back in the safety of his kitchen, he set the bat down heavily on the table, the noise of it colliding with the wood echoing the chaotic feelings inside. What would happen if they returned? Would other neighbors face the same intrusions? Anger surged within him, but beneath that, a troubling thought rested. Could there be a way to help them instead? Days turned into weeks as paranoia settled in. The community buzzed with stories, farmers locking their doors, patrolling their land, every shadow a potential threat. Sam could see fear etched in the faces of neighbors. There had to be a way to stand against this fear together. It was a sunny Saturday morning when he called a meeting at the old barn. Farmers gathered, some faces taut with worry, others resigned. Sam stood before them, his heart pounding. "We can't let fear control our lives. We've built this community on hard work and we need to protect it." Murmurs of agreement flowed through the group, eyes lighting with hope as Sam shared his idea. A neighborhood watch, a community united against the threat that loomed over them. They could organize patrols, share resources, and watch over one another's lands. As they planned, a camaraderie began to build. They shared stories of struggle and success, laughter mixing with a palpable sense of community. Farmers formed bonds that didn't exist before, united against a common foe. As the sun set that first evening of patrols, Sam stood with a few of his neighbors, flashlights in hand, looking out over the fields. There was a newfound sense of purpose, strength in numbers that shifted the weight of fear from their shoulders. But the shadows still lingered. One evening, as the watch continued, Sam spotted movement near the edge of the forest. A shape darted quickly between trees. He felt his heart race again, a firm reminder of the original fear that had brought them together. "Stay here," he whispered to his companions, moving stealthily toward the edge of the woods, flashlight illuminating the path in front of him. As he stepped deeper into the shadows, a familiar voice broke the stillness. Sam recognized it instantly. The voice belonged to one of the burglars from weeks before. The tension hummed in the air as Sam edged closer. He found the young man crouched in a clearing, visibly shaking. Sam demanded, anger boiling beneath the surface. I just wanted to see if you were still patrolling," he admitted, eyes wide. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to hurt anyone." Sam interrupted, feeling a pang of familiarity wash over him. Desperation was a feeling he understood. There had been times when money was tight, when the harvest was poor, and hope felt like a distant star. The boy nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. "My family, we're struggling." Sam felt the edges of his heart soften, battling against the instincts to shun him. "You have to make a choice," he said, voice steady but kind. "What you did was wrong, but I can't let you lose your way completely." He lowered his flashlight slightly, allowing the boy to breathe. After a long moment, the boy nodded, vulnerability washing over him. Over the coming days, the young man began returning to the farm, helping Sam with chores. Each day, he learned the value of hard work, how resilience is built in the soil. Sam taught him about crops, livestock, and the heart behind every effort that went into the land. What began as survival turned into growth, not just for the young man, but for the entire community. As word spread, more farmers joined in sharing meals, exchanging stories of hardship and resilience, creating a patchwork of support where fear once reigned. As harvest season approached, the atmosphere shifted. Farmers worked shoulder to shoulder, laughter echoing through the fields. They rallied together, celebrating victories and supporting one another through struggles. The camaraderie continued to flourish, the neighborhood watch transforming from a mere patrol into something deeper, a demonstration of connection and trust. Each wave of help rippled outwards, creating a culture of resilience among the farmers. One crisp evening, as Sam sat on his porch with the young man beside him, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the land. "You've come so far," Sam said, pride swelling in his chest. "I didn't know there was another way," the young man replied, voice soft. Suddenly, headlights flared across the fields, breaking the peaceful moment. Sam's heart skipped a beat, recognizing the vehicle. It was another farmer, but he was racing toward them, a look of panic in his eyes. "Sam!" he shouted, breathless. The calm night transformed into chaos. Sam felt adrenaline surge as the group sprang into action. They gathered flashlights, phones, and anything to help rally against the threat. He shouted, leading the charge toward the east barn. The shadows came alive, shrouding their figures as they rushed together, a force united against fear. Upon arriving, they spotted movement. A van parked ominously close, doors flung open. The burglars, equipped and desperate, scrambled amidst crates, loading stolen goods with frantic urgency. Sam bellowed, the sound resonating through the air like a thunderclap. The thieves turned, eyes wide and filled with panic. They had not anticipated being caught. One of them shouted as they dropped their loot, scrambling to escape. But there was nowhere to go. Caught in the brightness of the farmers' flashlights, the burglars froze, fear plastered across their faces. They were outnumbered, overwhelmed by the very community they sought to tear apart. Sam stepped forward alongside the others, composed yet resolute. "You messed with the wrong farm," he said, voice steady. "This is our land, our home." The burglars exchanged terrified glances. "We didn't want any trouble," one stuttered. "You made a choice," Sam replied, the weight of those words hanging heavily in the air. As the police sirens wailed in the distance, the harsh reality settled upon the would-be thieves. They surrendered with their hands raised, defeat masking their features as law enforcement arrived to take them away. As the officers cuffed the burglars and led them off, Sam and his neighbors stood together, a collective pride blooming as they witnessed the power of unity. "It's not just about protecting what's ours," Sam spoke solemnly. "It's about showing that we're stronger together. That understanding can lead to compassion." Tears welled in the eyes of the young man who had once been lost. He understood now that the path they traveled toward kindness would shine brighter than any darkness that threatened their way of life. The community thrived as they gathered amidst the twilight. Together, they celebrated, not just a victory of the land, but the triumph of community, resilience, and hope. It was in that moment that Sam recognized the reason for his earlier choice to confront the burglars. It was a catalyst that ignited a movement, forever woven into their lives. And as the moon climbed higher in the sky, illuminating fields without fear, Sam felt a profound sense of gratitude. Through every challenge faced, they'd grown stronger, an unbreakable bond forged in hardship, woven from understanding and collective strength. Together, they built not just a network of farms, they created a legacy of resilience, a beautifully tangled web of lives tied together, forever breaking the cycle of fear, one act of kindness at a time. And in that unity, they found something far greater than security. They found home. The moon cast a pale blue light over the sprawling fields, illuminating the farmhouse in an almost ethereal glow. Inside, Farmer Frank Reynolds sat in the living room, his eyes scanning the pages of an old newspaper. It was nothing more than routine, a simple, quiet night on his family farm. The clock ticked steadily, but something in the air felt different, a thin tension that lingered, subtle yet palpable. Frank glanced up from his paper, his instincts kicking in. Those instincts had served him well over the years, guiding him through storms and droughts, triumphs and failures. As he leaned back in his chair, a sudden noise splintered through the stillness, a crash from the barn. Heart racing, he dropped the newspaper and jumped to his feet, the old wood floors creaking under his weight. He reached for the shotgun hanging by the door, its familiar heft grounding him in the reality of what might lay outside. He knew this farm like the back of his hand. Every creak in the walls, every shadow that danced in the corners. He'd built his life here, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it away from him. Taking a deep breath, he stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars twinkled above, oblivious to the turmoil brewing below. He tightened his grip on the shotgun, the cold metal reassuring against the warmth of his palms. Silence hung heavy in the air again, but it didn't last long. A voice broke the stillness, a whisper that carried through the darkness. "Hurry up," Frank's breath quickened. 2 people. The realization sent adrenaline rushing through his veins. Crouching down behind a pile of crates stacked against the barn, he peered out, eyes narrowing. 2 young men darting in and out of shadows, their faces half hidden. They were fumbling with the barn door, their movements desperate and hurried. The taller one whispered, glancing nervously around him as if the night itself could betray them. "Does it matter?" The other hissed, frustration spilling from his tone. As their hands worked clumsily, Frank felt the heat of anger surge through him. These boys were taking dangerous risks. They were prepared to cross a line with no thought of the consequences. He stood, grit settling in his bones. He wouldn't let fear dictate his actions. "If you're planning to break in, you've picked the wrong farmhouse." Both men froze at the sound of his voice, eyes wide. They had not expected him to confront them so boldly. The taller one turned slowly, confusion mixed with panic. "We just want to take a few things." Frank's voice rang out, a blend of anger and authority. He raised the shotgun slightly, not to aim, but as a warning. He knew it was all about power dynamics in moments like this. Whoever showed the most confidence could shift the course of the confrontation. The second burglar shifted nervously, his breath coming in quick bursts. He squeaked. Frank interrupted, his voice growing stronger. "You need to walk away." The 2 men exchanged frantic glances, the desperation on their faces tangible. Frank could see them weighing their options, fear gripping them tightly. "Let's just go," the shorter one finally urged, gripping his friend's arm. With that, they turned and haphazardly sprinted away from the barn, disappearing into the shadows that cloaked the night. Frank remained motionless for a few moments, still gripping the shotgun, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, fueling an uncertain cocktail of relief and anxiety. He had confronted them, but the specter of what could have happened nagged at him. It wasn't the first time he'd felt fear creeping into his life. Farmers knew the struggles of seasonal downturns and erratic weather. But this was something different, something raw and consuming. Would they return? Who were they, and what drove them to such desperation? The rest of the night passed in a restless haze. Frank couldn't find peace, his mind racing as he replayed the scene over and over. He paced the wooden floors of the living room, the sun's first light a distant promise. Just as he thought he might be able to settle down, a low rumble of noise sparked his attention. It was early afternoon the next day when he heard it again, faint voices. Laughter mingled with the sound of metal against wood. Heart pounding, Frank moved to the window, peering cautiously outside. And there, right at the edge of the property, he saw them. The 2 men were back, lounging against a rusted tractor, maybe plotting their next move. "They're trying to steal something," he mumbled to himself, anger flooding through him again. They were brazen, reckless. They were testing the waters now, pushing boundaries they had no right to test. With resolve settling over him, Frank stepped outside into the morning light, his boots crunching against the gravel. This time would be different. He would not allow fear to dictate his actions. He shouted, striding towards them, voice laced with authority. Both men straightened, stiffening at the confrontation. "Just hanging out," the taller one stuttered, a sheepish grin plastered across his face. But the tremor in their voices revealed the fear underlying their bravado. "Doesn't look like just hanging out to me," Frank shot back, narrowing his eyes. "You think you can return after last night?" Just then, a shuffling noise came from behind them. Frank's heart dropped as he saw more figures approach, their friends. They were not just 2 disgruntled kids. This was a whole crew ready to trespass, plotting to cross a line he wouldn't tolerate. The taller one called out, waving his arms. "Looks like trouble to me," Frank replied, his heart racing, frustration boiling up. "There's nothing here for you to take." In that moment, the tension thickened, electric in the sharp afternoon air. The crew exchanged glances, their confidence flickering. But moments later, the bravado shifted. The first burglar stepped forward again. "Look, we're not bad guys," he insisted, voice rising in defiance. "We just thought." Frank barked back, eyes blazing with indignation. Beads of sweat formed on their brows as uncertainty cloaked them. Frank could see they were panicking, but their next move gave him pause. They weren't just clumsy kids out seeking a thrill. There was something in their eyes: hunger, desperation, maybe even fear. "It's hard out here," the second burglar murmured, his voice barely audible. Frank's anger began to ebb, replaced by a wave of understanding, an emotion he felt deeply for every farmer who battled the extremes of weather, the hardships of a changing economy. "You don't understand what you're risking," he replied, voice softening slightly. "Every time you come here, you're putting yourself in danger. This is my home." As he spoke, something flickered in the eyes of the burglars, an awareness, a sense of potential remorse. He shifted his weight, realizing that every story had its layers, and perhaps if he reached out, it could lead to something positive instead of conflict. "Listen," Frank said, his voice steady. "Step away from this. I know things are tough, but you don't have to steal." The taller burglar's eyes widened slightly, and he shook his head. "You don't know what it's like. No one's offering us jobs. We're hungry, man." The desperation was palpable now, and Frank felt his resolve wavering. He couldn't ignore the humanity in their struggle. "I get it. I really do," he said, a deep breath steadying him. "But there has to be a better way." The anger returned for a moment, burning in the taller burglar's voice. We thought maybe we could find a way forward here." Frank could see the wave of emotion crashing over them, the vulnerability beneath their hard exteriors. They were angry, yes, but they were scared too. Scared of failing, scared of being forgotten. He could feel their eyes searching his for an answer. "We need help, okay? Maybe you could." The second burglar said, voice softening as he glanced back at the ground, shame washing over him. For a long moment, Frank weighed their desperation against his own instincts. Helping these men could endanger everything he had built. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the fields, he felt the weight of their pleas pressing upon him. As he prepared to speak, a loud noise suddenly erupted from behind them. A barking dog charged toward them, teeth bared, eyes fierce. It was his loyal sheepdog, Rusty, sensing the tension. In an instant, panic spread across the burglars' faces. One of them yelled, scrambling back. Frank shouted, but the damage was done. The burglars turned and fled, scrambling over each other as they dashed past him, hearts racing in fright. Rusty barked behind them, but Frank stepped forward, feeling an unexpected temptation. Should he chase them down, bring them back to confront them once more? But something in him hesitated. They were gone in the blink of an eye. As the adrenaline faded, frustration settled back into his bones like an old friend. Frank felt a mixture of anger and a growing sense of defeat. He could have helped them, maybe. But instead, they ran, leaving him with unanswered questions. Just as he turned to gather his thoughts, Rusty stood alert by the edge of the field, barking at the void where the burglars had vanished. Then, sharp and clear, Frank heard it, a faint rustling in the brush nearby, punctuated by soft voices filtering through the trees. Heart racing, he moved closer, trying to listen. Were they plotting their return? Did they have accomplices? Frank's pulse quickened, realization dawning. He needed to know what was going on before this escalated. He crept closer, the world around him vibrating with tension, every sound magnified. And then he caught their words muffled but distinct enough to strike fear into his heart. "Let's get the tools when it's dark. Tonight we'll make our move." Just like that, fear coiled around him, icy and merciless. They were planning something that could threaten not just his farm, but everything he loved. He stepped back, heart pounding in his chest, knowing now that their intent was no longer innocent. This wasn't just a game. He had to act to protect his land before it was too late. But how? As he stood there, urgency washing over him like a tidal wave, he knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. The shadows shifted and the sun dipped lower with every heartbeat. Frank turned on his heel and dashed back to the house, fueled by instinct and determination. He grabbed his phone, dialing his neighbors as he raced through the door. "I need your help," he said, breathless. "It's happening tonight." With urgency propelling him forward, he rushed to gather supplies, feeling the weight of the world settling squarely on his shoulders. What would happen now? Would they be able to protect everything he had fought so hard for? Or was the safety of the farm slipping through his fingers just as the daylight faded? The twilight air crackled with anticipation, and the night of confrontation lingered, just out of reach. Frank could only brace himself for what would come next, hoping against hope that this final encounter would open the door to a different kind of resolution, one built on understanding, empathy, or perhaps something far more challenging than he had ever anticipated. The stage was set, the stakes raised, and Frank found himself standing on the threshold of fear and hope, ready to face whatever darkness awaited him in the coming night.